Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm going to tell you about a restoration and tortoise monitoring effort we initiated in 2013 here at Archbold. And I presented some of this as a poster at the Gopher Tortoise Council's annual meeting, but I'm going to go more in depth here for this audience a bit. Before I jump in, I want to acknowledge a host of people who've been involved in supporting this work over the last 7 years, including many Archbold staff, research assistants, interns, and volunteers you see listed here. We have some great collaborators at the University of Georgia, Cornell, and University of Miami. And I also want to thank Disney Conservation Fund and Riverbank Zoo for providing funding to support our research and restoration efforts. So as many of you probably know, Archbold is the site of a 53-year demographic study of gopher tortoises. It was initiated in 1967 by Dr. James Lane. And we were able to kind of reinvigorate, oh, apparently my video is not going, okay, sorry, here I am. We were able to reinvigorate this long-term study in about 2012 with the funding from Disney. And we've created a tortoise database that currently contains about 3,700 capture records for more than 1,500 individually marked tortoises. There's a few, maybe less than a dozen of the original tortoises marked in the early years that are still alive in our study area. So for example, tortoise 21 here, who was marked in May of 1968. For those who aren't too familiar with gopher tortoise life history, just a quick overview. This is a fossorial species of the southeastern US coastal plain. All life stages, even from the smallest juveniles, dig these deep burrows that are used by many other animals, including hundreds of invertebrate commensals. So it's an ecosystem engineer and keystone species in these upland ecosystems. Like a lot of turtles, it's very long-lived. It's late maturing with low reproductive output. The females only produce a single clutch annually, so typical clutch sizes around here are 6 to 9 eggs. Gopher tortoises need well-drained sandy soils for burrowing. They require open canopy vegetation structure so that they can thermoregulate, and so they have suitable nesting sites. And also that open canopy provides for having abundant ground level vegetation for food. So the ecological process that would have maintained these desired vegetation structured or characteristics historically was fire. So this is one of many upland disturbance dependent species that we're trying to manage for. Just to set the stage a little more, Red Hill has the most dense population of gopher tortoises on the station. And this is where most of our mark recapture effort has been focused. This is a really special place. So Sandhill is a relatively rare ecological community in southern peninsular Florida. Abrahamson et al. Described Red Hill, which is in the southeast section of this of the original property, as an example of a turkey oak phase of southern ridge sandhill. The gopher tortoise is a focal species for our restoration here. Based on the last few years of mark recapture data, we estimate there are about 113 adult tortoises in the population. And our initial survey showed that this population was highly skewed toward older age classes. Red Hill still has an intact herp community despite decades of fire suppression. So we still regularly see indigo snakes, diamondback rattlesnakes, Florida pine snakes, gopher frogs, six-line race runners, scrub lizards. So it's a great place to work. But back in 1927, if we go back in time a little, there was a severe wildfire that went through Red Hill. You can tell from this photo in 1933, it was really open after that. And the station actively suppressed fires for decades. And this led to basically invasion of sand pines, and the habitat became very close canopy. Tortoises responded to this by either moving out onto the edges along roads where they could find food, or they moved into this 4.5 hectare field on the top of Red Hill that we call Hill Garden. For a while was used to grow vegetables and fruits for the station. And then at some point it was converted to just a field with bahia grass, exotic forage species. So they're quite packed in there, as you can see from the burrow densities. So our goals for, so I should say Archbold tried to reintroduce fire, in the late 80s. This wasn't, it was just a very difficult enterprise with all the sand pines and risks of wildfire. So we decided to reinvigorate this effort. We, in 2013, we wanted to re-establish the frequent fire regime in Sandhill and get back the correct vegetation structure. At the same time, we have to sort of optimize management of hill garden, this ruderal habitat where most of the tortoises currently live and where most of the reproduction is probably happening. So at this point, we're 7 years in, I wanted to pause and assess whether our efforts are actually starting to pay off. And I'll show you, we are making good progress. I am concerned that our gains are a bit precarious though, because we are seeing a surge in invasive species. So we're kind of at a pivotal point where we can either keep progressing with this restoration or we could backslide depending on what we do in the next few years. So ecologically, this is a case of figuring out disturbance regimes that will favor this threatened disturbance dependent species that we're trying to help versus other undesirable species that are also promoted by frequent disturbance. So the restoration work really involved mechanical clearing, 1 or 2 initial rounds of that with either gyro tracking or tractor mowing, and then followed by prescribed fire. And we have also been mapping the extent of exotic plants and implemented control measures, mainly hand removal and herbiciding. So this map shows the number of rounds of mowing and fire in each unit at this point. The Sandhill units have been mowed up to 2 times and burned up to 4 times since 2013. The units outlined in orange were the only ones we were able to map burrows in before and after fire. So those are the data that I'm going to show you in a minute. And as you can see, though, we have done an initial round of mowing and burning in Unit 1 north of Hill Garden and some other areas. And Hill Garden itself was mowed between 1 and 3 times per year and burned 4 times since 2013. So in conjunction with the restoration, we've been doing intensive burrow surveys annually where we walk closely spaced transects, try to find every burrow. We measure the burrow widths, which gives us sort of a snapshot of the burrow size class distribution within that unit. And throughout the year, we're up there a lot. We're recording opportunistic sightings of tortoises. And during the burrow surveys, we scope burrows and try to capture the tortoises. So we have pretty thorough coverage of this area. And that enables us to look at the capture histories and determine sort of a minimum number of tortoises that we're using or residing in each unit over the last few years. So here's what it looks like as far as tortoise responses so far. This is showing the number of active and inactive burrows per hectare. So these are the total number of non-collapsed burrows that are possibly occupied by tortoises. And it's going across in time from the pre-fire year, whatever year that was in a given unit, to, in some cases, we've had 3 fires per unit. And the Sandhill units, Sandhill graphs at the top are averages across the 4 or 5 units that we've treated so far. So you can see there has been this uptick, steady uptick, actually pretty dramatic, almost a tripling of adult tortoise densities in Sandhill units. Interestingly, we've also seen an increase in burrow densities within Hill Garden in the ruderal habitat. And so what's going on here, I think, is that this is a long-lived species, so you don't expect to see recruitment happen quickly. So this response is probably being driven by more immigration of tortoises from peripheral areas of Southeast section, and they're coming in. There also may be less emigration, say, of subadults, because now there's more habitat available, so they don't just leave the study area altogether. If we look at the graphs on the right, you see that it took a little longer, but after the 2nd or 3rd fire, we are also seeing an uptick in burrows that are juvenile sized. So that's encouraging that maybe we are starting to see a recruitment response. The burrow densities only sort of give you an index of use. Tortoises dig and use multiple burrows each year, so those data can be affected by things like social dynamics. So we want to look at actual numbers of tortoises. So I'm showing that here, broken out by males, females, and juveniles. So our overall adult population is pretty stable. Over time, the interesting thing that confirms our subjective impressions is that, yeah, we're seeing more juvenile sized tortoises, ages 3 to 7, in our both the ruderal and the Sandhill areas in the last couple of years. So that's encouraging. So the rest of this talk is more about the restoration or management lessons that we've learned just so far and what we want to do going forward. So after a few wildfires and learning the hard way, we figured out that an initial mechanical clearing was needed to safely reintroduce fire to these long unburned areas. And as I alluded to earlier, fire controls woody species, but that canopy removal and disturbance also creates opportunities for invasive exotics. So even if these species were absent in the seed bank, they were waiting in the wings along the roads and fire lanes. And so we're finding that we need to do much more proactive weed management. To show you what I mean, here's one of our units that was mowed in 2016, and then we actually didn't get around to burning it until 2018, but we started mapping exotics in 2017. And this is going across in time through to 2019, these 3 maps. We map exotics along a 10 by 10 meter grid, essentially. So each unit or each symbol here is showing relative percent of all exotic species combined percent cover. So the larger the symbol, the higher percent cover. And yeah, so you can see that basically the things that were along the edges, or in this case, there's an old dump area there in the northeast part of the unit, are expanding inward after the mowing and fire treatment. One species we're really concerned about is Guinea grass. This is an example here growing on our east boundary of southeast section. This is sort of a no man's land that's unmanaged. Although we hadn't noticed Guinea grass in the interior of Red Hill until about 2017, it showed up in that old dump area. It showed up near an old burn pile in Hill Garden. And then in doing Borough surveys in 2018, 2019, we found a few more spot infestations. So this year, 2020, we really tried to hit Guinea grass hard. We feel like it's a species we can eradicate with some effort. And we treated the known spots with chemical in June of this year. We revisited in November, and you can see that about half of them that are here in aqua color, when we went back in November, we did not find any live Guinea grass at those spots. However, the ones in yellow still had some living Guinea grass, so we treated again. So that's an example of the effort that it's going to take, even just for this one species, to try to get it under control. So if there's one thing I've learned from doing this in like wetland restoration projects, timing is everything. We are certainly aiming for early detection and rapid response. It's just a question of resources. Going forward, I think we need to do a better job of getting those weedy edges under control before we burn. And then we should just plan on trying to get into these burned areas within a few months after a burn to see what's resprouting, see if we can interrupt the weed life cycle by removing early life stage plants before they have a chance to seed out. That would be the ideal approach. The other thing that we've been doing has to do with how are we protecting tortoises while we're doing all these things like mowing. We obviously don't want to run over tortoises and destroy burrows, so we work hard not to do that. But mowing is a good, it's a useful technique for maintaining these roadsides and rural habitats. So we have tortoise rules. We only mow early in the morning before the tortoises become active. We actually don't mow in late summer, like from early to July to mid to late September. Is a no mow time. We let the hatchlings emerge from their nests and dig burrows. And then we also don't burn too close to that hatchling season. We don't want to have the hatchlings come out of the nest and have no cover from predators. So those are all sort of common sense things that we can do. So as with any restoration, there's a lot of uncertainties on the front end. You never really know what's in the seed bank or how native and non-native species are going to be responding to your disturbances. There's been a few welcome surprises. So in this photo is showing an area inside Hill Garden where I don't really know why, but the gopher apple and Pityopsis and Galactia are just coming back on their own, and the Bahia grass is dying out. So whenever I get a little bit discouraged about things like guinea grass, I go look at this patch. I think, okay, well, whatever we're doing there is good. But I will also say that Bahia grass isn't the worst thing. So it's much better than having open spots where weeds can colonize. So it holds the ground and it provides a lot of food for tortoises, which is probably why a lot of them are not stampeding out of Hill Garden. I didn't mention this, I think, when I showed my slides of tortoise responses, but every time we open up a unit, basically, we're seeing like 1 or 2 female tortoises move into that new habitat, and then the males quickly follow. But we aren't seeing huge, emigration out of Hill Garden of animals that are well established in there. And then we also have a few animals that are kind of bouncing back and forth. So they're using other Sandhill as it becomes available, but they're not necessarily abandoning their home territory there inside Hill Garden. We're also having some unwelcome surprises. So there's some weird exotic woody species like balefruit and Strophanthus in Hill Garden that we thought had been eradicated a while ago, but they're coming back. So we're experimenting with chemical control methods. We are really concerned about fire ants. 6 or 7 years ago, I would have said we really don't have imported fire ants on Red Hill. But within the past year, we're seeing a lot of them in the highly disturbed areas. This is a problem. They are voracious predators on small herps, including hatchling gopher tortoises. So we're going to have to work to control those. So as we think about going forward, there's some knowledge gaps and difficult questions. Obviously, we have to figure out how to prioritize with so many species that we're dealing with and limited resources. We really wish we had data on the relative toxicity of herbicides to gopher tortoises, but those data just don't exist. So we have to be very careful, and basically we're not doing like broadcast herbiciding. The other question is that the mechanical treatments can't continue indefinitely. As gopher tortoise densities continue increasing in the Sandhill units, it just may not be feasible to go in there with tractors and things because you'd be running over burrows. So at that point, we hope that there's going to be enough ground level fuel like wiregrass to carry the fire. But I guess that remains to be seen. So I would say we may have bitten off a little more than we could chew, just in the pace of burning, and we need to slow that down a bit and develop better strategies to control exotics. Some of that has to be us finding ways to boost our volunteer engagement with more participation in weed pulling events. I do want to give a shout out to one of our great volunteers, Steve Turner, who has been a hero going up during this year of isolation, the Lone Ranger on Red Hill pulling the tall grass every week. And we know where you've been, Steve, so thank you. We need about 50 more of you. The other thing that I think we really need to think about is we need to rethink this idea that we operate with like separate fire management plan and separate invasives management plan. Each has implications for the other. So we got to look at how we sequence and time things like fire and mowing and exotics control to interrupt the life cycle of these undesirable species. And then each unit has a different disturbance history. So these plans kind of have to be tailored for each unit. So in the time I have left, a few minutes, I kind of wanted to zoom out a little bit and just point out the obvious that, clearly Red Hill at Archbold is not the only place with invasives issues. You could go to conservation lands all throughout the Lake Wales Ridge and other areas and find exotics creeping in. But I am concerned. We're seeing expanding infestations on the Archbold Reserve, on the ranch, both in terrestrial upland and aquatic wetland situations. And I just feel like we may be lagging behind a bit here. It's not just that our already weedy places are getting weedier. There are places where our native areas are being invaded. And so this has unknown consequences for ecosystem integrity. It's not just plants either. So there's a wide range of organisms. We heard Wes Anderson talk about feral pigs at the ranch. There's a species that is not only a predator, but it has these severe impacts on wetlands through rooting. I had an intern in 2017, Elizabeth Shadle, who surveyed 62 seasonal ponds throughout the scrub at Archbold, and 85% of them had at least some rooting by pigs. And then these other species, we're just not sure what impacts they have as predators or competitors with native species. And then there's more predators on the way. So I'm particularly concerned about Argentine black and white tegus. Here's a current distribution map from EdMaps. I've had agency staff in Southwest Florida warning me that they're headed our way. And unfortunately, they do quite well in scrub. So here's just some thoughts on bigger picture next steps that I hope we as a conservation landowner can undertake in the coming few years. We need to develop those kind of integrated land management plans that I was referencing. We need to have strong biosecurity protocols, not just for macroorganisms like tegus, but microbes, disease and parasitic agents. We really need surveillance efforts for the species that are known to be headed our way and a plan for what we're going to do if they get here. And then there's a ton of existing science out there that we can leverage and working groups like Heartland SISMA to help us prioritize and address invasives. And we can consider dedicating more of our own research to invasion ecology to inform these things. So I think about where the station was in the 1980s when everyone started to recognize what we stood to lose if we didn't change course with respect to fire suppression. And the answer for Archbold then was to launch a really scientifically rigorous program of fire management and to share what we learned with others trying to protect Florida scrub. And I asked myself, well, where would we be now if we hadn't woken up to that? What if we had just put up our hands and said, this is too big of a problem. It's going to take too many resources, right? We wouldn't be having probably, such a good feeling right now about the trends of the rare species on Archbold. So, I think we all want Archbold to continue to be a place where people can come and do research on a relatively intact natural system. So I just wanted to devote some time today to that bigger picture and raising awareness about this particular issue. And I will end there with one of our great female tortoises. And so, yes, I know I went through a lot of stuff there, but hopefully I left a little time for questions.
Thank you very much, Betsy. Yeah, we do have time for some questions, and I've got a few here in the Q&A that I'll go through. First up, we have Cheryl Millett. She wanted to know, are invasive species listed in the order of magnitude? So what's the biggest problem that you're facing on Red Hill?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to figure out. So there's different ways of answering that because there's the question of not just extent, but difficulty of control, right? To me right now, I think the tall grass is a huge concern. I think I underestimated the extent to which it would invade these sandhill units and can grow quite dense and thick and outcompete other understory plants. So I'm very worried about that one. We can't go in with chemical control in these units for that. That's like hand pulling. That's probably right now the one that concerns me the most.
Great. We have another question from Joe. He wanted to know, what time of day do tortoises become active?
Yeah, there's been a lot of research on Archbold on that. So we have a good answer. They're most active in the hottest part of the day. But anytime the temperature gets above about 70 degrees, which is like early in the morning in South Florida on most days except midwinter, they can be above ground and out from their burrows. So we kind of, try to not be mowing after 9-ish in the morning. In the winter, you might be able to stay out a little bit later than that.
Great. We have time for a few more questions. Nancy Bissett wanted to know, do you know any seed bank studies, especially for invasives?
I have not done extensive literature reviews on seed bank studies. I'm sure there are some. I know there's good work on Natal grass and other species. I will say that I'm stretched a little between herpetology and restoration ecology. Adding invasion ecology and seed bank studies is like makes my head want to pop off. But collectively, we need to take all that science that's out there and use it to inform these management plans that I think we need.
I'll add a follow-up to that. Roger Anderson, who is speaking later in this morning session, I believe he's going to be talking about Natal grass, but I believe he also might have some data from some germination studies that he's done.
Awesome.
So I'll have to stay tuned to see what he says. And then we have another question from Louis. How do you mow without collapse? You use tractors?
Yeah, very carefully. So when we first did the treatments in long unburned areas, I knew we didn't have to worry too much because it was so overgrown with sandpine that basically it was uninhabited by tortoises. But after the first round of mowing, then we have to go in and do, our best cursory survey to flag burrows. And then we leave at least a 15-20 foot buffer around all the burrows when we mow. But yeah, we have used gyro tracking and tractors, which could collapse burrows. So we go in and try to find the burrows and protect them.